All right, good morning. I am going to take 5 minutes only, and then we will get to the experts. But first of all, I wanted to thank you for coming. I know this Open Source Summit typically is not a traditional networking or an edge conference, but we were lucky enough to get like a room to at least have a small discussion with the experts, and specifically, around the topic of edge compute. How many of you attended the keynote on day one? Yeah? Okay, most of you. So you kind of know the big picture here, right? Where edge compute plays kind of the critical role between, enterprise access and cloud and core. And at LF-Edge, I think what I wanted to talk about was mostly the progress here to date. So we have a governing board meeting next week, and we're going to sort of wrap the current status of everything. So I want to give you just a sneak peek of some of the numbers there. So we had almost 50% growth on projects. So we added 5 new projects, which some of you heard this morning, or you will hear the rest of them. But some of those projects have really good momentum in terms of use cases, right? Whether it's for like Edge Lake for smart cities and kind of a database on that, or Instant X that you just heard from a V2X data exchange, or InfiniEdge AI, AI-based project, etc. There's a huge lineup also of additional projects, right? That fundamentally, if you look around, LF-Edge is probably the only open source foundation that focuses on unifying frameworks across the 4 markets that edge compute serves, right? Cloud edge, telecom edge, IoT edge, and enterprise edge, right? Those 4 markets. And then, everything from the definition of what edge compute terms are, user edge, service provider edge, etc., all the way to specific frameworks for specific use cases. We all know there is not one solution for the edge compute market, right? And that's why all these projects have a use case, but then they also integrate and work with each other. So the main thing is, like, we have new projects. Vodafone joined as a premier. It's like great to have them on board as well. A lot of the events that have been happening, the One Summit, etc., have seen a huge spike in the number of number of impressions and the number of visitors that we see on social media and on LinkedIn as well. So if you're not already following, what's the handle? LF-Edge, right? Yeah, if you're not already following that, do follow it. You'll get a lot of cool updates on that. But other than that, I think we're really excited about how 2025 is moving on. Keith and I were just talking. In my early days, EdgeX Foundry was the project. When I was at Dell, we envisioned it, right? Too early on, from a time perspective, because nobody knew what edge compute is. But now we see, and some of the analysts have told us, edge compute is 4 times the size of cloud computing market, because it impacts multiple industries, right? So we just have to be ready with the open source project, right? Yes, there will not be a Kubernetes of LF-Edge. Like, let's get that straight. The one that drove the CNCF and the cloud market. So there's no one project, because this is such a complex environment. So we're really excited, and I just wanted to, thank you for participating, coming, and I'll not stand in the middle of learning from the experts, but thank you. Any questions for me that I can answer or handle or take back to the team on LF-Edge and be part of LF-Edge, or things you'd like to see? Open for ideas. No? So far, so good? Okay. Then, Kate, go for it.
Hi, everybody. Just saying, actually, it is Antwerp since we all last got together from an LF Edge perspective, which was sort of pre-COVID days. So we've probably all changed a bit since then. But good news is we've made some progress. So what I'm going to talk to you about today, so EdgeX, you may or may not be aware, was one of the founding, when Linux Foundation decided to create LF Edge, EdgeX was one of the founding projects that sort of came into LF Edge at the start. So EdgeX started several years ago. And can I just have a quick show of hands? Who knows what EdgeX is, or who has any familiarity with it whatsoever? So, okay, well, I'll try and give you a brief overview of it for those people that haven't. So just in terms of who I am, so I've been involved in running distributed, real-time and embedded software products companies for over 30 years now. Essentially, for my sins, and God knows, don't ask me how I got into this field, I have no idea. But middleware has been the name of the game for me in terms of providing that bridge between applications which require a whole bunch of common services and the operating systems. And that's particularly relevant when we talk about the edge and the diversity that we have to cope with at the edge. How do we manage that diversity? So a few things came together several years ago. Arpit mentioned Dell had started a project to try and define a common set of requirements around an edge platform that would support a range of applications that they would then deploy on their gateways. And a big part of that was openness, the ability to have a multi-vendor approach to this problem space. So basically, the idea was that we'd create this project called EdgeX, and at the time I was starting up a company that was also going to be building those same kinds of things. So we decided to join, and it was right up my street as well. So basically, sort of stars came together. EdgeX Foundry was set up, and actually I became the first chair of the technical steering group for EdgeX all those years ago. And then a guy called Jim White took over, and then Jim retired. So just in terms of a quick snapshot, as Arpit mentions, the original open source contribution and founder of EdgeX were Dell Technologies back in 2017. The project aim, even at that time, we had big ambitions for the project. It was to become the global standard for open edge computing. And back then we had 50 founding members show up to a meeting at Analog Devices in Boston, and they all came together to form this project. And basically that was the start of it. So this became an open source, vendor neutral project and ecosystem. It wasn't just about developing the code, it was also around building the ecosystem of people who were going to be needed to support that, the developers who were going to develop it, supporting industrial companies who were going to build out applications. The idea was that this was very much a loosely coupled architecture which would allow people to build on the baseline technology. So it wasn't just about trying to impose anything. There was a core set of functionality, and people were encouraged to come in and add value. So the whole idea was this platform, which I said is very, very important at the edge, is hardware, cloud, operating system, deployment, and application agnostic. And importantly, as you'll come to find out, it's an Apache 2 project from an open source perspective. We've all seen some of the things that have been going on lately with commercial companies changing some of their open source models, which has produced a few problems. So the key tenets, I think I've already mentioned a few of them, but I've provided all the slides to Jill, by the way, so if you want to get access to the slides and go into more detail at some point, you can. I've only got like 20 minutes, so I can't go into details, but the sort of tenets of the whole thing was that this thing, as I said, platform agnostic, extremely flexible and scalable. at the edge, we're deploying to potentially thousands and thousands of devices. So we have to be able to think about that scale and what that means in terms of performance and manageability and all those kinds of things. The idea was that we build a reference implementation. So, this wasn't just about writing something down as a piece of paper. We actually went out and built a reference implementation. You'll see the numbers of developers that contributed. A big thing that we did, and still a big thing today for companies, is this notion of data normalization at the edge, right? So you've got all these sort of things coming in, BACnet, all these Modbus, all these different protocols. They all have different protocols, all have a different way of representing their software. What you want to do is to make that data available to your applications. And a big part of what we did was create this thing called the data normalization layer. So essentially took all of the work out of understanding these difficult protocols and so on and presented them in a way around standard SDKs that you can run different protocols and get access to data very, very easily. Another important thing, flexible intelligence at the edge. Deploy any AI, right? I mean, there's an awful lot of innovative AI solutions coming about, but you need some kind of decent platform to be able to provide those deployment environments. And so EdgeX is very well set up to be able to deploy rules engines of your choice or AI ML at choice, and must be easily manageable. So since our inception, we've actually achieved our goal. EdgeX has become by far and away, the largest open source edge implementation in the world. To date, even with COVID now, we're well in excess of 10 million container deployments, downloads, with around, and that equates to about 900,000 plus deployments. We still get 3,000 to 4,000 website visitors a month. There's still a very, very active community. Yeah, that was one point I wanted to make. I missed actually the top one. So at the start of the project, we had something like 200 active contributors to the project from a multitude of companies and from a multitude of different skill sets. So we had 2 or 3 specialist security companies contributing security, code and so on. We had Intel, we had, Dell, all of these people coming in and IOTech, who were, big contributors. One interesting thing that I want to point out to now is the governance. So in the early days, this was very much a technology-driven company project. And this is one of the big things I want to talk about during this presentation. It's really, where is EdgeX now and where is it going? And there's a huge transition happening. And that transition that we're seeing is kind of away from core development. The core technology is quite mature, although there's still things to do, obviously. The big thing now is that we're seeing pretty large customers come in and start to drive requirements and to become part of the project and to actually effectively take over the reins of taking this thing forward as these companies start to deploy at scale with their edge compute environments. So as an example, just recently, we've had Eaton, Danfoss, and Schneider all join the board of EdgeX, and those are all big proponents of the technology and all using the technology in trying to come up with generic edge solutions for their sectors. So where does IOTech fit in? Well, for this type of project and for many open source projects, it's really important that you have companies that come in and will come in and add value. Red Hat, for example, with Linux, right? So, and this space is no different. You need commercial companies to come in and add value, and that's what IOTech does. So, as I said, we've been involved in the project right from day one, been a major contributor to the project. In fact, I think we're the second largest contributor now behind Intel. And we're now starting to see, as I said, a transition of the project from core development through to major deployment. And a big part of that, and the ability for companies to be able to do that, you've obviously got some companies who take the open source, who develop their own kind of structure and product around it. But there are quite a large number of customers out there that don't want to do that. But they also don't want to deploy pure open source code into factories. Who do they call up on on a support line if they have an emergency or whatever? They've got to be able to get access. They're very interested in some of the value add that people bring. So, so we've essentially, as a company, started to build out, over the past several years, industrial grade products, services, and support models around core EdgeX. And obviously, our approach is to be 100% compatible with EdgeX, right? So that if you go off and you develop an application in your lab, it'll cooperate and interoperate with an application built somewhere else, providing we all, work to the same kind of APIs. So ultimately, that's led to our Edge Central offering, which is an industrial-grade version of EdgeX, and in particular, the long-term support release. So one of the things that we've been able to do with EdgeX is now move towards a long-time support version. So, we're guaranteeing that particular versions of EdgeX will remain supported. So, for example, one thing that we would bring in as our kind of services would be to provide companies with extended life to LTS, yeah? So that, for example, if you're deploying in a factory where you've got a life cycle for your project of, 10 or 15 years, people need to be able to work to pretty long-term support needs for these types of things, okay? So we come in and we provide these services, and that's basically the core of EdgeX. It is, as I said, it is the leading open source Edge platform, and we use EdgeX as the core of our industrial grade product. We also build out some of the functions so that we move away from reference implementations and actually move towards core. So we've got a huge number of device services or connectors that can connect with pretty much anything. And so we can acquire that data in real time, do things with it at the edge, and basically, everything from store and forward, but also plug and play at the edge of applications functionality if you actually want to do any control or any work specifically at the edge. And then on top of that, this is another area of quite large work at the moment is how do you manage and monitor at scale these large deployments, and there's a lot of investment going on in that area, and we're no different. So that's kind of where we add our value. And as a customer of EdgeX, or as a user of EdgeX, you've got fantastic options. You can use the community edition. If you want to, you can go away and you can basically take the community version of EdgeX and you can build your own products and do your own thing, okay? And, there are companies out there that do that. The next level would be a first commercial engagement with either IOTech or some other commercial company who's coming in and offering you some kind of support of at least the long-term support version. You want to be able to get access to long-term support of your project. And then finally, it might be that we have some added value products as part of Edge Central that you want to buy versus build, and that can be the whole platform, or it can be individual bits, because we've got this microservices architecture with a nice, well-defined API, and we all use the same APIs. We can all plug and play in this environment. So that's the kind of model. I won't go into detail, but that's kind of where we come from. So what's the next journey for EdgeX? EdgeX COVID inclusive. I think COVID probably put a sort of 2.5-year dent in our progress both as a project and a company, but we're back on, and now the market is really maturing, and that's also obviously coinciding with EdgeX maturing, and maturity is important. So the project is still in existence. Obviously, it's still building stuff. It's still doing a lot of stuff. But there's a very core, mature baseline. And that's really, really important. If you're building out new projects, it's not all about, going in and creating new innovation, especially at the edge. We really want, APIs that basically are there and don't change much. If you're a developer, you don't want to be kind of like, every time somebody comes out with a new version of EdgeX, you don't have to rewrite your whole application code. You want some stability in the APIs and some kind of guarantee that if you base your product on EdgeX, that it's not going to be, form a major rewrite in like 2 or 3 years' time. If there are going to be changes at the API level, then what's the migration path? And actually, that was, if I sort of give myself credit for just one thing as chair of EdgeX TSC, at that first meeting with my experience in bringing middleware products to marketplace, I insisted that was something that we really took care of, was how we evolve the APIs and how we make sure that people can migrate in a very, very straightforward way. And I think that mature baseline and those mature APIs is essentially giving companies, big companies and others, a large amount of confidence. So we are now moving to the stage where we're moving away from kind of core technical development, although that's still going on, I'm going to tell you what, and we're moving towards large-scale adoption. And these are some of the companies that are heavily involved in taking EdgeX and looking at mass deployment EdgeX. And one thing you'll notice is that it's not restricted to any particular vertical domain. It's across multiple vertical domains. So you've got Jinko Solar, very big storage, battery storage for cells. A major oil company who I tried really hard to get them to reveal who it was, but they refused. But just to say it is a top 5 global oil company, and they're looking at potentially EdgeX as one of the options to standardize on their Edge platform. CBRE, again, looking at starting to think about how they build. If you go onto their website and look at their approach, their business approach, strategic imperative for them is how they can build services into their offering, into their sort of, I don't know, God knows how many sites they've got. It's like potentially in the hundreds of thousands of buildings that they've got under management where they plan to deploy Edge as a service offerings as part of their customer offering. Schneider Electric, big industrial automation company. Traditionally, they've always developed their own stuff. And I'm not saying that EdgeX is the only thing they're looking at, but they certainly have EdgeX as part of their portfolio. Verizon, big buildings automation users, this is mainly for their own buildings. Danfoss, you might be aware of. I think they're like a $10 billion company producing equipment for things like, large-scale fridge control, for example, for supermarkets and so on. And then you've got people like Eaton, again, industrial automation. So quite a big specter of different applications across different verticals. And the other thing that's happening is you've seen that they're now part of the governance of EdgeX, is that they're also now starting to drive requirements. As we mature and as we become to understand things like security a little bit more than we did in the early days, then these are the areas of future collaboration around areas where people are going to want to move in the future. So there is still really big investment going on in EdgeX. Probably, as I said, the core functionality, pretty stable, and we want to keep it that way. But there are new services coming in. So in the supporting services, some of the original reference implementations just are not good enough to support global adoption. So things like there's a new edge alarming service that's being developed. there's a new scheduling service and historization services, all of which will become part of the product and can be used or not used. You can choose to use your own or write your own. Things like database functionality. We're vastly improving the storage and database capability within EdgeX, and obviously things like security I've already mentioned, and a big area for a lot of people, system software lifecycle. So those are the main areas that people are wanting to look at investing. So in terms of key short road-term roadmap items, and if you are involved in any of these areas and are interested in collaboration, then by all means get in touch, and we'll put people in touch with all the people involved. So, so there's a couple of key things that all of our big users are looking at, and for which we're seeing a reasonable amount of collaboration. Management at scale, as I've said before, and edge security is another. So these are topics which, several years ago, it was a complete minefield, but now the standards evolving, international standards. There are very definitive requirements coming out of the users now in terms of what they need, in terms of how to secure their systems. And like I say, we see people willing to collaborate, willing to contribute to defining the requirements for these things going forward. And then we have short-term roadmap items. So all of these things are going to be coming into the products in future. Some of them might be open source, some of them might be commercial offerings, right? Not everything is going to be free. There's no such thing as a free lunch, as they say. I'm not going to go through this, but if you are interested in EdgeX, this architecture diagram, which you can get hold of from Jill, kind of shows you what's coming in, a little bit more detail about some of the things that are coming in, a little bit more detail about whether something is going to be open source or whether it's going to be a commercial product or not. And so, a couple of examples, a new Python SDK. So that's been contributed probably by Eaton. So they've funded for Python SDK capabilities put in place. And then, like I said, all of these other things that we've talked about previously. So, as I said, don't have time to go through this, but if you're interested in talking about it in more detail or interested in getting involved, then by all means, come on board. So, obviously, EdgeX is still an open project, still Apache. You can still get involved, and we would welcome you to come and join the project. There's always been like a cadence of 2 releases a year. When we've had a major release, sometimes we've slipped back to 1, but we are up to something like our 14th release now since project inception. And these are some of the things that are coming in terms of the new version of the product towards the end of the year, and that will probably be a 3.2 release. Some of these things that we're having to do, as I mentioned before, are replacements for open source contributions that we incorporated into the product, but then the companies that we were using chose to take those to commercial implementations. So, for example, replacement of the HashiCorp services that were incorporated, mainly around things like Vault and so on, and Redis also. We use their database. And the good news is there are companies that have come in. So IBM have come in and created OpenBow to replace HashiCorp stuff. And there's this new project called Velki, which has come in and is looking to carry on work along the Redis open source branch. And then, again, I won't go through this in any detail, but this is the roadmap, if you like, of the industrial grade project. And you see some of these things coming in, like alarm service, historian services, and those would be things that IOTech has invested in and will therefore, be charging for those things. So, in summary, these are my personal thoughts. These are not the thoughts of the project, so I have to say that. Like I said, EdgeX is the most successful open source platform project out there, without doubt, okay? And its maturity is actually coinciding now with market maturity. And as you've seen, we've started to see a lot of adoption by some of the major corporations who are building it into their edge strategies. I would say that EdgeX is moving to a brand new phase, which basically is deployment at scale. So, we've all at the edge and all in IoT lived in the proof of concept heaven, where we've all done our proof of concepts, and then we've waited and waited and waited until somebody says, hey, yeah, well, we're going to take forward this into a major project, and it never happened. How many of those things have we all been involved in, right? It's changing now. It's changing in a big way, and people are planning and looking at deployment at large scale. This is this is no longer a question of if, it's happening out there, and as you've seen from those major companies. How is it driven, or what's driving it? In my experience, it's not just the big companies, it's users large and small. It's end users with big problems. I mentioned the oil company. We've got others, people like SKF who produce bearings, or big adopters. But it's also the solutions providers, not necessarily the systems integrators. I'll stay quiet on that. It's more the large OEMs who are trying to build out their own platforms, and who are trying to build fundamental decisions about what they do going forward. One of the things they want to do is talk about open systems, and that's not a philosophical thing. I mean, I have a philosophical belief about building things as open solutions and avoiding, especially lock-in with the big cloud vendors. But at the edge, we deal with so much diversity that you have to be dealing in open systems to be successful. If you don't, then you're going to end up with some pretty difficult to manage proprietary solutions. So we have to, just purely by the nature of the diversity of the edge, have to be thinking about how do we build out these things to be open. And the second thing is, people want to use best in breed. They want to have the ability, if some great new AI whiz comes along, okay, they want the ability to deploy it. They don't necessarily want to be able to have to go off and, build into that company's sort of strategy on platform. They want to have a common generic platform across the edge that will support them and support all of their business units. One of my customers, one of the smaller ones amongst that list I put up there, has something like 14 different implementations of Modbus alone, right? All developed by different project teams in different BUs. I mean, how ridiculous is that, right? And it's not just happening at the device service level. It's happening in a lot of other places. I would maintain that, in certain areas, especially at the edge, you've got to have, as part of your ecosystem, people that are able to bring in industrial grade support for these products. When you're deploying things in a factory, you can't afford to wait for the open source community to fix a bug for you, okay? You have to be able to fix it, and you have to be able to rely on to be fixed. So companies coming in who are part of the ecosystem, that are building new things, that are offering support services, they're also a big part of these projects going forward, and EdgeX has those. On the downside, we are encountering some trust issues with some vendors who've started down the open source route, but are then deciding that they're going to move their programs to commercial implementations. And all of a sudden you find that the development of the open source stuff stops, and the only way you can get access to that in the future is through a commercial license. And that might be fine. I mean, these companies have to succeed, and maybe they've come to the time where they need to build out the model. But I would say, please, when you're choosing an open source project, try and choose carefully, and just look at some of these issues around which, is this company going to stay open source? What's the nature of the licensing? and so on. Anyway, that's come to the end of my presentation. I hope I was on time. If not, I apologize. You can get hold of me here, and the EdgeX resources are all here. And as I say, I'm going to provide the deck to Jill. Anyway, I hope that was helpful, informative, useful for those of you who know about EdgeX and those of you who don't. Thank you.
I note two things you mentioned on one of those slides as areas of interest being management at scale and edge security, and that I presume extends into supply chain security and rug pulls from open source and that sort of thing. What steps is LF Edge and EdgeX taking as a project to advance on management at scale and security and to mitigate the rug pull problem?
So I'll start with management at scale. Edge management appears to be more of a commercial, I'll start with management at scale. Management at scale seems to be more about commercial projects entering the market. I mean, you know, you've got everybody from Intel, Dell, all of the big players with their, you know, large-scale Kubernetes-based systems, and then, you know, there's literally probably 100 different vendors out there, different vendors' choices, and it's about choosing the right one for you. So I don't really see, I think that actually I tell a lie. There is a project which is sponsored by, I can't remember its name, unfortunately. I'll maybe give it to Jill, but it's actually just started up, and it's started up by people like Schneider and Intel and those guys, and they are at least trying to define some common APIs around which some of these management tools, you know, might work and so on. But it's very, very early days, yeah. So at the moment, I think at management scale, I think it's mainly a vendor issue, although there are open source projects starting up to address some of those issues. With regards to security, like I said, I had no clue where to go with security, you know, when we started this project. There were so many different views on what constituted security at the edge and so on. And, you know, and that was even amongst the security companies that were involved in the project. Since then, there's been quite a lot of work within the standards community, people like ISO, and I think there's standards that's fairly common standards that are emerging on both sides of the Atlantic in Europe and in the US, and those are the standards that are driving some of our end users' requirements. Now, at the moment, what we're looking at is an inter-company collaboration around that with the big companies and with a company like IOTech. But it's quite possible that we might look to try and get LF Edge involved in that as we go forward, yeah? Because I think it has some wider applicability, you know, beyond, you know, EdgeX. Yeah, but I'm happy to sort of provide, you know, more information if needed. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you. And thank you for not going to sleep. Thank you.